I would like to greet everyone who's here, who so kindly and sacrificially joined us live for today's MEI webinar. Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning. We have 97 from 32 countries who registered. This is Ramon Rocha of MEI welcoming you to our webinar today, Stronger Together, Creating Winning Partnerships with Sam Richardson, who is joining us from London. Sam, I'll formally introduce you later, but please say a quick greeting to our audience.
Yes, welcome everyone. I'm here I live between London and Cambridge, and we have some lovely weather here in the UK. And being English, I have a cup of tea with me, as you would expect.
Thank you. MEI's mission is to help equip and encourage global Christian writers and publishers to create life-transforming materials in their heart language and in their local context, and that these publications will help strengthen the church and impact society. And we trust that today's webinar will especially be helpful to publishers and writers who, especially if those working in the majority world, face limited resources. There could be strategic partnerships and collaborations out there that could be pursued, nurtured, and developed. These agreements could be long-term relationships or time-bound or on a per-project basis, but this could be helpful and mutually beneficial to all parties. I guess I could cite Ecclesiastes 4:12 as an analogy. Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Solomon is emphasizing an age-old truth. There is some strength in numbers. Our speaker today is Sam Richardson. Sam is Chief Executive of SPCK, the UK's largest Christian publisher. SPCK stands for the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. It is relatively a mature publishing house, should I say. Is it 300 years old, Sam? We have a youthful publisher for a relatively mature publishing house. Under Sam's leadership, SPCK has won Specialist Consumer Publisher of the Year award 4 times. It has increased its income by 150% by organic growth and by acquisitions of IVP UK and Lion Hudson. Sam is also serving as a board of trustee of MEI Europe and also its treasurer. And Sam is a serious marathoner. In fact, this coming fall, he will participate in 2 major marathons in Berlin and in Chicago. So we're so delighted to have Sam with us as our speaker today. But before I ask Sam to begin, let me just remind you, our audience, to interact with us using the chat for your comments and type in your questions anytime using the Q&A. Even during Sam's presentation. He said he'd be glad to be interrupted and answer your questions right away. What I'll do is to keep my video on and I will interrupt him when you have sent a question to us. So Sam, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Please take it away.
Great, thank you very much, Ramon. And yeah, I am indeed delighted to be here. We have a topic, Stronger Together, Creating Winning Partnerships. For those of you who were at Lit World last year, this content might seem quite familiar. Some of this is, I was asked to repeat the same material, but the world has moved on since then, and there's a fair bit of new stuff in here as well, although the structure itself is quite similar. But yeah, be aware if you were at Lit World, you may have seen some of this before. And we have a structure. I'm going to share 3 models for how we might think about working with partners. I'm going to share 4 examples from SPCK about some partnerships we've had that I've been proud of. And then I'm going to give you 3 things to think about in terms of things that you might take away with you. I'm happy to make the slides available afterwards to save anyone from having to take notes and so on. And as Ramon says, he will sort of keep an eye on the chat and interrupt me if there's comments coming on as we go. Otherwise, I'll also try and leave some time for some questions at the end. So the first model for partnership I want to share with you is something called zero-sum game. Some of you may have seen this movie, A Beautiful Mind, for which Russell Crowe won a Best Actor Oscar. And zero-sum game is an idea that comes out from game theory. To give a slightly less scary example than the mathematics that's behind Russell Crowe, think about a buffet. This is the buffet that we saw at Lit World in Hungary last year. And I've used this term buffet anxiety. I often find if I'm at the back of the queue for a buffet, I get a level of anxiety. Is someone going to get all the good stuff in the buffet before me? Because in a buffet, there's only a certain amount to go around. And that's a bit like a zero-sum game. There's only a certain amount to go around. Similarly, it's like a pie. There's only a certain amount of the pie. If I have more of the pie, it means that there's less of the pie for you. And again, that's what we mean by a zero-sum game. Let's say I've got $10,000 or 10,000 euros that I want to buy a car. I see this car here for 8,475 euros. So I could pay the list price. I could pay the owner what she's asking for. So I would be left with 1,525 euros and the car, and the seller would have 8,475 euros. Or I could try and negotiate a better deal. I could pay 7,500 euros for the car. I'd be left with 2,500 euros, and I would have the car, and the seller would have 7,500 euros. Or the seller might turn down my attempt to bargain for the car, and we wouldn't be able to agree on a selling price. I would be left with 10,000 euros, and the seller would be left with the car. But what makes this a zero-sum game is that in all 3 outcomes, there's the same resources that are shared around. There's 10,000 euros and a car. The only thing that changes is who's got the car and who's got most of the 10,000 euros. But the resources in the game are exactly the same. And that's why in mathematics, this idea is called a zero-sum game. And zero-sum partnership can feel a bit like this. It can feel like a tug of war. It can feel like the only way I can win is for you to lose, or the only way for you to lose is for me to win. And there are some kinds of partnerships that inevitably can feel a little bit like that. If they're very simple partnerships and the only thing that you can talk about is the price, then it's going to feel a little bit like a tug of war. But the more different angles we can bring to a partnership, the more creatively we can think about it. I hope we can move on from this first model of zero-sum partnership and instead start thinking about finding a win-win partnership, if you'll excuse my poor Photoshop skills. A win-win partnership when we're all pulling in the same direction. So with a win-win partnership, instead of fighting for the pie, we're trying to make the pie bigger so that we can all have a bigger share of the pie. There might be a couple of different ways that we can try to grow the pie as we continue to stretch this analogy. We might look to grow profit by working in partnership with people to develop efficiency savings. Efficiency savings don't sound exciting. They don't always sound very Christian, but they are in line with the biblical principle of good stewardship. And many of us, in terms of how we buy and sell rights, that's exactly what we're doing. We're sharing some of the costs of creating a book. We're sharing the costs, for example, of the illustration, so that we're able to develop efficiencies which enable us to have the book available in lots of different languages. We're sharing the costs and therefore being able to get the book out more widely than if we were each trying to commission that book individually. But we can also look to grow sales by, that should say, expanding markets through effective partnership. For some of us, that's going to be easier than others. Some of us are already in growing markets. This is an interesting slide showing the growth around the world between 2010 and 2050 of population in general, which is the grey bar, and the number of Christians, which is the red bar. So I think most of us here, with the exception, or in fact all of us here, with the exception of those of us in Europe, we're all in an area where there's going to be growing numbers of Christians. There's going to be more Christians in 2050 on your continent than there's going to be in 2010. So that gives a real foundation to look to create these win-win partnerships where there's already momentum for growth in the markets in those spaces, especially when we consider that many more people are becoming literate and many more people are able to afford books, as well as the fact that there's more Christians. So there's good encouragement for many of us that we can look to grow the size of that pie. Although some of us, particularly in Europe and in England, we're in an area, if we just see the previous slide, Europe was the only continent where the number of Christians is going down. So for us, this is in England, it looks at when you were born and how likely you are to be members of particular Christian denominations. And we can see that the blue area, which is the Church of England, SPCK's traditional core market, has been through a massive decline. And the orange area, which is no religion, has been on a huge increase. So Christian publishers in that space are facing a declining pie. And so there's particular incentives for us to think cleverly, what are the kind of Christian books we can do that might sell into the orange area? What are the things that we can do to make Christians buy more books? How can we work together to find those efficiencies if it's going to be difficult for us to increase the sizes of our market? So that's some thinking about what win-win partnerships might look like through either growing markets or finding efficiency savings. But the third model I want to share is what I'm calling win-win-win partnerships. And Romain shared this earlier, a cord of three strands is not quickly broken. This is from Ecclesiastes. And you often see this passage quoted at weddings, and you see it on people's fridges and that kind of thing. But I don't think it is primarily about romantic relationships. If you look at the rest of the verse, for me, it's a lot more of this speaks to business partnerships than it does to romantic partnerships. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. And then, of course, we end up with a cord of three strands is not quickly broken. And so that's the idea of three strands, win-win-win partnership. It's about finding not just a win-win, but a win-win-win, a win for us, a win for our partner, and a win for the kingdom of God, a win for the gospel. That's the win-win-win partnership idea that I want to share with you, and I think is a really good way of trying to think in a distinctively Christian way about what good partnerships might look like. I'm now going to share 4 different examples from SPCK of where we've been able to work with some partners in a way that I feel has been win-win-win and that I'm very proud of. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything we do at SPCK is successful in terms of partnerships. We have many examples of things that haven't worked out, but I want to give some inspiring content. So I'm going to share some ones that I've been particularly proud of that we've achieved over the past few years. Just to give a bit of background on SPCK, as Romain mentioned, we were founded in 1698. In the 1700s, we spent a lot of time doing Bible translation. In the 1800s, we founded the schools that are now the Church of England schools in the UK. In the 1900s, we had bookshops in the UK and around the world. I suspect a few people in here may have been into them at some point. In the 2000s, the bookshops ran into trouble in the face of Amazon and in the face of increasing rental costs in the UK and so on. And the bookshops ended up getting shuttered, and a lot of people thought that SPCK as a whole had gone out of business. In fact, it hadn't done, and but we did focus back on publishing, and this was the time when I was brought in after the bookshops were closed, and we have a new vision to create conversations between Christianity and culture. We're a mission agency, and we want to be outward looking. We have a mission to publish great Christian books around the world. There's always been a global element to what SPCK does, and that's really important to us. But it's often not about us publishing them, it's about publishing them in partnership, as we'll come to see. And increasingly, we're looking to buy rights from other global publishers as well. We have 4 values that we try and live up to. We want to be significant, to make a difference in the world. We want to be passionate, to be excited about what we do. We want to be creative, using innovative ways to reach as many people as possible. And we want to be knowledgeable, bringing the best knowledge from our team and from our authors and from authors around the world, and bringing that to the church and beyond the church. So that's just a little background on SPCK Group. As Ramon mentioned, we've been fortunate to win some really encouraging awards in recent years, and we've seen our revenue go up as well, both organically and with 2 big partnerships with IVP and Lion Hudson that I'll talk about both of them in a minute, although I'm not by any means arguing that mergers are the right way to go for every organisation, and we've got some other kinds of examples of partnerships as well. This is the map of partners that we have at SPCK Group. Staff, overseas publishers, IP partners, literary agents, etc., etc. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but this mapping exercise can be a really good example of how many different people we actually need to be reliant on in order for our businesses and our missions to be successful. Even those who like to think of ourselves as independent publishers, as we do at SPCK, in fact, we're not independent of the need to work closely with people in many different areas and many different skill sets. And we do this mapping exercise on a fairly regular basis. We have this sort of circle of stakeholders, talent, suppliers, and customers to try and sort of work out where different types of partners fit on this map. And if you haven't done something like this before, it can be a really useful exercise to think about, okay, where are your main partners? What are they looking to achieve out of their partnership with you? So the first big partnership I want to talk about is the one between SPCK and IVP, which came together in 2015. IVP UK, it's worth mentioning, is a different organisation to IVP US, although and IVP India and the various other IVPs around the world. So although these organisations share similar histories in that they were sort of spun out of the local Christian Union movement, they're independent organisations. So IVP UK is the one that we're talking about here. And in 2015, IVP was an independent publisher, although it was doing more than just publishing. It was also doing distribution and it was doing retail. Those latter 2 activities were giving it a turnover of about £5 million. Operationally, it was breaking even. It wasn't making a profit, but it wasn't making losses either. But the problem was that it was leaking cash. It was investing more and more money in the stock it needed to support the distribution and the retail operations. And as a result of that loss of cash, it had fallen behind on its royalty payment to authors, and it wasn't able to invest in new products. And so it was agreed that there'd be a partnership between IVP and SPCK to get IVP back onto its feet as part of the larger SPCK group. And we simplified what IVP was doing. We helped it to exit rapidly from the distribution and retail spaces and focus on its traditional strength of publishing evangelical Christian books. That's kind of a classic turnaround model. We were thinking of those 2 models of the pie. We were willing to give away the idea of making the sales bigger in order to focus on making the operation profitable, bringing the operation into a surplus, starting to develop positive cash flow. The first thing we did was pay the royalty payments up to date. I think a key thing about partnership is paying people on time, and at SPCK we had the funds to be able to bring to do that. And we were able to invest in creating a number of exciting new products. This Bible Speaks Today Bible, which won a number of really good awards, is one example, bringing the sort of high level of investment and SPCK's knowledge of Bible publishing and combining that with IVP's brilliant reference content from the Bible Speaks Today series that is published in many different languages around the world. And since then, we've done another Search the Scriptures Bible as well, taking SPCK's Bible publishing skills and IVP's fantastic bank of content, in this case, Search the Scriptures, which is a Bible reading guide. And this kind of Rolls-Royce product was what we were doing to try and show that SPCK is bringing investment and creativity to IVP. We also did an online course around IVP's most successful book, God's Big Picture. We gave away, or we worked with a partner to give away free videos based around the book. And what we discovered was that giving away the free videos actually doubled the sales of the book. It was already the most successful book on the IVP list in terms of sales, and being generous with the content. Anthony Gosling has given a really good talk on this for MAI. Being generous with the content actually helped to come around and boost the sales of the book. So it was a win for SPCK, increasing the scale and breadth of what we were doing. For IVP, it enabled it to survive, to retain its theological standpoint, to retain many of the staff. And for the Kingdom, a rebirth of IVP with exciting new products, including study Bibles and online courses, which have reached many people who wouldn't have had access to them before. The second example is a very different one. It's with another partner organisation of ours called the Clergy Support Trust. So clergy is the word we use in the UK for ordained church leaders, pastors, whatever they might be called in your country. In the UK, they can be men and women. They will have been through a theological training course. And what we created was a library for the people doing those theological training courses and in their first posts as clergy, a library that you could get in an app or that you could get online, and it had access to all of the SPCK and all of the IVP titles. So again, the partnership between SPCK and IVP was valuable because it meant we had a lot more content to bring to the table to get our friends at Clergy Support Trust excited about it. And they funded SPCK to make this app available, and we were able to pass the royalties from that onto the authors. So it was a win for SPCK in that it created a new income stream, but it also gave us direct access to a really important market for us of future church leaders within the Church of England, helping us both to be able to market to them, but it's probably more importantly to understand what they thought about our products, what they were actually searching for, what they actually wanted to read. It's a win for Clergy Support Trust because it's much simpler for them to administer. In the old days, they posted out a book voucher, and that obviously is quite complicated to do. You end up spending a lot of time putting book vouchers in envelopes and typing up addresses and all that kind of thing. And it's a win for the Kingdom because the future church leaders, they now have access to over 1,000 books, whereas the old book voucher might have enabled them to buy maybe 1 or 2 books. So it's given much better value to everyone in the partnership, and another good example of a win-win-win partnership as far as we're concerned. A win for us, a win for our partner, and a win for the Kingdom. The third example from SPCK is another merger, the more recent one in 2021 with Lion Hudson. This was one that was very close to my heart. I grew up reading the Lion Children's Bible. That is my Lion Children's Bible, although that's my son who's reading it. And one of the things that really excites me about Christian publishing is the ability to sort of pass knowledge on between the generations. And I was therefore particularly keen to see that Lion Hudson, which has been doing this so effectively for so many years, able to carry on doing that. So this was, Lion Hudson wasn't in trouble in the way that IVP was in trouble. Instead, we sat down and we had a look at the different strengths of the different organizations, and we saw that there were a number of ways in which they complemented each other. SPCK was the leading British publisher for adults in terms of the Christian space, and Lion Hudson was the leading publisher for children. SPCK had a great strength in trade sales. Lion Hudson had a great strength in rights and co-edition sales. SPCK was on the front foot with growth momentum. This is back before COVID. And Lion Hudson was in a place where it had stabilized under new ownership following a different period. It had gone through a difficult period in the 2010s. It had gone into administration, which is like Chapter 11 in the US. And it had come out under new ownership who had managed to do it, and new management who had done a really good job in stabilizing the business. SPCK's owners, our trustees, they were committed to being a globally significant Christian publisher. You've seen that significant word in our values. Whereas the owner of Lion Hudson, they were open to focusing their attention elsewhere once COVID-19 came on. They had a number of very important businesses and ministries that they were involved with. So they were open to exiting from the Lion Hudson business. They could be confident in SPCK because we had a track record from the successful integration with IVP, and Lion Hudson was ready to acquire with a good leadership team and a good staff team already in place. So we sat down over a number of conversations and thought that this merger made sense for the different organizations when we looked at these complementary nature. And 2 years on, we've managed to get everything fully integrated. The IT always takes longer than you expect it will do, but we got there in the end. We had some great endorsements from the book trade, with the combined group winning Christian Publisher of the Year in 2021 and being shortlisted for Independent Publisher of the Year against all the secular publishers in 2022. And we're budgeting for a profitable 2023 to 24, and we're on course so far. So the financial side is also starting to deliver. So in terms of win-win-win, it was a win for Lion's owner to be able to sell the business and be confident in its future. It was a win for SPCK in order to give us further growth in scale and further diversification. And it was a win for the kingdom, securing the future of Lion's vital work. Lion's titles reach into over 200 different languages, all of them through partnership with publishers who specialize in those languages. But we were able to bring SPCK's level of investment and design expertise into sort of creating the next generation of Lion children's Bibles. This is one of them. So we've bought SPCK's most successful author, or best known author, Tom Wright, NT Wright. And he's done a new story Bible, very much in the sort of traditional Lion Hudson values of creating something of really high quality, high level of investment and high level of ambition and biblical. At the same time, we've been able to bring SPCK's design expertise and SPCK's investment into this big story Bible. We've already licensed editions in the US to HarperCollins, and we've sold co-editions in 5 languages already. If it's something that you're interested in having a look at some samples of, it comes out in spring 2024, so there's time for other publishers to get involved in this partnership. Vanessa Norman, my colleague who handles our rights sales, would be the person to contact. And what we find with these kind of what we call co-edition partnerships, the more people we have involved in the print run, the better the price gets for everyone. It's a great example of the pie both growing in terms of the reach of the product and growing in terms of the profitability. Having 5 publishers on board in the print run will mean that we're able to give really good prices to people. But if we can get 10 publishers on board, then that'll make those prices even better. And because those prices become better, maybe that'll mean that 15 publishers can come on board. So this kind of co-edition model that we continue to operate is a great way to be able to increase the pie and share it among Christian publishers around the world. The final example from SPCK that I want to mention briefly is something we were doing just last weekend, actually, at a festival called the Big Church Festival. So this is a festival that happens on a national holiday in the UK around the time of Pentecost. about 10,000 Christians coming together for the weekend at the big church festival. And what we did was that we set up this storytelling tent. And we ran it over the entire weekend with a timetable of events running back to back, many of our best known and most popular authors coming along to Big Church Festival, and reading or doing workshops or doing drama with a range of young people of all ages from 2 to 15, as well as with their parents. And again, a fairly simple kind of concept, but one that really delivers a win-win-win. A win for SPCK by giving a platform for our authors where they can perform and share their books with people face to face. Many of what we hear from a lot of authors is that being an author can be quite lonely. You don't often get to see the people who read your books or to meet them. And so authors really appreciated the chance to actually interact with their readers. It's a win for Big Church Festival because SPCK puts this on for them. So it's a really cost-effective way for them to widen the program and improve their offering for younger people. And it's a win for the kingdom because hundreds of young people going through that tent, hearing samples from Christian books, being able to engage with the gospel. So that's the fourth example of some win-win-win ideas from SPCK. Maybe they will give you some inspiration. Hopefully they will at least give you some motivation to think about how to develop some win-win-win partnerships. But in the last 10 minutes or so, I want to give 3 more specific things that you might want to think about in terms of win-win-win partnerships.
Sam, Catherine was asking if how to apply these principles with writers.
Yes, thank you. And so some of these principles are more focused on publishers than on writers. I think one example for writers to think about is to think about doing the exercise with the mind mapping exercise around your partners, because although I said authors can often feel lonely, in fact, there's many different partners who you need as authors in order to be successful. If you're traditionally published, there's obviously that partnership with your publisher. But even within that publisher, you can think about who are the different people within that publisher you're working with. You might be working with a cover designer, a marketing person. So to sort of map out your different relationships within your publisher, but also think about your network more widely and how can that be helpful. For example, can other authors be? How can you help other authors with training? How can other authors help you? Perhaps by reading your book, providing endorsements, providing advice on your content. And then think about where might the other partnerships be for you as authors? Are there local churches you can partner with? Could you go in and help them? Could you preach at a local church? Could you go in and do something with their Sunday school? Could you go around some of their home groups? Then more widely afield, are there bloggers who you could build partnerships with? Perhaps you could, especially if you're self-published, perhaps you could give away some free copies of your book as part of relationships with bloggers, competitions for people who are part of those blogs and so on. So I think for authors, don't forget that partnerships are really important for you, and start out by mapping out that exercise. Start out with that mapping exercise as an author, I think. But yeah, although the examples have been from publishing, I think hopefully Catherine and the other authors here will find that as we get onto these 3 things to think about, they may well apply more broadly than just to publishers.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Inge is commenting that she has started partnering with associations in Tanzania, like Tanzania Evangelical Ministry, and exchanging ideas and venturing into some projects together, and like printing gospel handouts which could be given to people. So thank you, Inge, for that example.
Great, yes, very, very exciting, and it sounds like that has started with some conversations, and I think that's where a lot of the best partnerships start with. So on the things to think about, the first one is primarily aimed at publishers or organisations who are sort of operating at scale. Are you the right size? I obviously had a couple of examples of mergers and acquisitions within my SPCK examples, but at the same time, they aren't necessarily right for everyone. There's advantages to being small, and I'm sure many authors are aware of this. They don't need to worry about office politics. You're able to move fast. You're able to be involved with all different aspects of what you're doing, and you can have low overheads if you're small. On the other hand, there's advantages to being large as well. There's economies of scale. There's the ability to access big suppliers and customers. There's being able to have specialist teams to operate in different areas. And there's the fact that you have cover for succession if people leave, or if people, we have this saying in English, if people go under a bus, if there's some kind of disaster and someone's not able to be in the business anymore. And there's also medium size. Perhaps medium size is the best of both worlds. You can be fast moving, but you can also have economies of scale. Or I think at SPCK, we found that being medium-sized, we felt a bit like we were stuck in the middle, that we had overheads, but that we didn't have reach. And that's why we pursued a strategy of mergers and acquisitions. But that's not necessarily right for every organization. And it's also not necessarily right for every market. In fragmented markets, I think we see quite a few of these in Central and Eastern Europe, for example. There might be multiple players struggling to make ends meet. There might be duplicated infrastructure. It might be difficult for the Christian publishers to get the attention of the general market. I think in those kind of markets, there's big opportunities for publishers to look at partnering more strategically together. On the other hand, there's some markets, some would say that the US has moved in this direction that can be a bit too monopolistic. There may be too few publishers. There may be lack of choice for consumers. There may be high prices for consumers. There may be a lack of innovation. It may be difficult for diverse and distinctive voices to find publishers where they can cut through. Obviously, what we want is a balanced market where there's several financially healthy Christian publishers, where they're able to innovate, they're able to bring diverse voices forwards, and they're able to think about getting Christian books into the general market. So again, I think this is helpful for authors to think about this as well in terms of what kind of market are you operating in as an author. If it's a monopolistic market, for example, there might be real benefits in self-publishing, being able to do something outside of that kind of stale traditional model. If it's a fragmented kind of market, then there's a question of how can you support your publisher in that fragmented market. The publisher will be struggling to make ends meet. So how can you bring value to your publisher and help them with their ministry? How else might we partner together? Could we, for example, find economies of scale in buying? If we're self-published authors, could we form a conglomerate, and could we look at getting better value for money on our covers? If we're publishers, could we look at working together on, for example, printing? So SPCK and IVP had been working together on printing for 10 years before they actually merged. We've been sharing the economy of scale to create better prices in our printing. Could we work together on areas like sales or representation? Again, with SPCK and Lion Hudson, SPCK had already been doing Lion Hudson sales representation for them, so there was already an element of partnership there. Could we work together in distribution? Certainly in the UK, distribution has increasingly become a game where you need to have lots of scale in order to be effective in that. For self-published authors, for example, there's organisations like the Society of Authors will help you find where you can. They'll help suggest people like Ingram who can give you access to scale distribution rather than having to spend all your energies posting those books out of your house. Can we share in areas like IT systems, back office kind of functions, or accounting? Again, for authors, there may be examples to sort of find shared bookkeepers here, for example. The handling royalty statements and that kind of thing can need some complex kind of accounting, and there could be ways for authors to partner up and find someone who can help them with their tax returns. Web sales, again, is that another area where we can look at finding partnership? And market research, I think this is a really interesting one where maybe authors, maybe church bodies, maybe publishers can look to work together. And sort of in the spirit of that, I'm just going to very briefly share some market research that we've done at SPCK. About 15 years ago, the new atheism was all the big thing. That's the Blue Line, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and all that stuff. And in fact, that stuff has really tailed off in the past 15 years, and the general Christianity area has grown. So, and we like to think that the books we published played a part in that, in explaining that the values that the atheists were sharing weren't actually very positive or very coherent. But what we are seeing now that's worrying is what's called sort of New Age or mind, body, and spirit is making a comeback in the UK with books. So here's the top Christian chart. The good thing is it's got several SPCK books in it, but the bad news is it's also got quite a few books of witchcraft showing up in the religion chart. And psychic powers and astrology has been one of the most successful topics in the UK market in the last few years. Maybe COVID's created uncertainty about the future. Maybe lockdowns have forced an inward turn. In the UK, religion isn't the first thing that people are turning to anymore. So I think market research and how we reflect on that, I think that's a really interesting opportunity for publishers and authors to get together and think, okay, what's going on here? What are the kind of areas that authors might be writing into? What are the kind of insights that authors can bring into this that publishers might think about? Marketing activities. Another example from the UK, one of the bigger Christian bookshops set up a thing called the Big Church Read. 8 or 10, I think, of the bigger publishers got on board with funding it and making authors available. And it's been a really good initiative in terms of being able to create some simple and popular and regular material for particularly small groups to use to come together and study books. Could something like that be done in your country? Could that be driven by publishers? Could it be driven by an authors organization? Could it be driven by a church organization? It's certainly a model that's worked really well in the UK. Training, I think, is another one. And again, this is one that really applies to authors. And Stephanie from Edinburgh posted in a question, in Scotland, the secular publishing community is collaborative, and larger publishers give time to advise and invest in smaller ones, often one-on-one. The results are clear. Why does our own sector seem to find this difficult? What role does trust play? And I think Stephanie's question sort of rings true to me to some extent. I was really pleased to be involved in the Independent Publishers Group, which is the secular organisation that has a mentoring scheme, and I was really pleased to be able to mentor the MD of a startup Christian publisher as they made their way in the space. And in the UK, we don't yet have something quite similar in terms of the publishing space. I know that in the writing space, MAI has been putting together some Zoom groups for authors to meet together and pray together and share their challenges and so on. But I think, is there more that we as MAI could do in terms of supporting UK publishing? Often we sort of tend to look overseas, and there may be things that we can do much more locally. The Christian Suppliers Group did manage to do something 3 or 4 years ago in the UK where they did an introduction to publishing course, and they got the rights manager from one publisher and the finance manager from another publisher and the production manager from another publisher. And they got them all to do little presentations in the day to introduce new people into the publishing world. And I think that was a model that worked really well. I think trust certainly plays a part in organisations being willing to sort of spend time to support each other. But I think ultimately it comes down to that model of the pie. we need to trust each other to work together if we're going to grow the size of that pie. If we keep on trying to do our own thing, I don't think we'll be able to grow that pie. So I think a good challenging question there from Stephanie. I think training is a real area, one that MAI obviously plays a big part in, where we can really benefit from working together in partnership. I think the thing with all these different areas is that you could do them, whether you're an author or whether you're a publisher, you can do them without harming your theological distinctiveness or your brand distinctiveness. There's no evangelically distinctive way of doing book distribution. There's no Catholic way of doing accounting. It's these areas where we can work together across denominational boundaries or across theological boundaries. And as I said in answer to Stephanie's question, if we can find ways to work together efficiently in these spaces, I think there's a real opportunity to make that pie bigger, give ourselves more things that we can give ourselves more that we can share in together. And finally, I think it's always worth a bit of self-reflection on, are we effective partners? Jenny posted in a question, I think publishers rarely communicate their vision or bring it down to a level writers can appreciate. Likewise, few publishers seem to have the patience to journey with a writer to encourage and develop them rather than just to market with them. But I think I've got 3 questions that kind of arise from that. Do your partners know your vision and values? I hope you know SPCK's because I shared them earlier. But we also share those vision and values with our secular partners as well. We think it's useful for them to understand where we're coming from. Anyone who walks into our office, you see our vision and values painted in bright yellow paint all around the roof supports of our office. So we try and share them. We try and share them widely. Are you willing to be a long-term partner? Going back to the metaphor of the 3-string chord, that's designed not to be easily broken. That's designed to be there for the long term. And authors like Tom Wright, SPCK has been publishing him for 35 years from when he wasn't a well-known author. And I hope that both Tom and SPCK have really been able to benefit from that long-term partnership. Although at the same time, there are partnerships that come to their natural end. Have you thought about how to end those partnerships well? If you're going into an author knowing that this might be your only book with them, are you being upfront enough about the fact that that's likely to be the case? So thank you, Jenny, for that. And I hope those are some useful thoughts spinning off from it. Do you know your partner map and key partners? As we were saying, I don't think this just applies to publishers. It can be for authors or for other people in the space. Which of your partnerships feel like they're zero sum? Which partnerships could be win-win-win? Are there partnerships that are currently zero sum that you can look to move towards a win-win-win model? Do you meet regularly with your partners? Do you know your partners? At SPCK, we host in London, at the London Book Fair a couple of months ago, we hosted a dinner for many of our key partners, 50 of them or so, getting together, spending time with each other as well as with us. And again, I think sometimes we can be a bit paranoid about letting our authors meet each other. What happens if they start talking about advances with each other? Letting our partners meet with each other. What happens if they find better partnerships between themselves than they might have with us? But again, for us, trying to build the power of this network is really important if we're going to grow the size of this pie. Do you know what your partners think of you? Have you thought about sending out surveys, not just to your authors, but to your printers, to your typesetters? Are they happy with the way that you handle them? Do they feel that you reflect your values in how you do that? If you're an author, can you send? Can you ask your publishers what they think of you? Can you ask if you're a self-published author? Can people like your typesetters or your cover designers, can you find out how they found the experience of working with you? What can you learn from that can make their lives easier next time you bring a book to them? Are the partners that you have now the ones you would look for if you were starting from scratch? There's definitely a benefit in long-term partnerships But I think there's also benefit in occasionally taking a step back and thinking, have I got the right partnerships? Am I busy putting so much effort into my current partnerships that I might be missing out on the opportunity to develop some new partnerships? And have I considered strategic partnership opportunities? We talked about mergers and acquisitions, but there's plenty of things short of that. Some of those areas where we might be able to share services as publishers, or perhaps form conglomerates or little groupings as authors. That's the end of my material. I don't know if we've got any more questions come in as of yet, Ramon.
Yes, thank you so much, Sam. That was really an insightful and helpful presentation. In fact, we have Jeff Crosby asking us a question. Do you have a person or a team who is looking after this partnerships, win-win-win partnerships, or is it you yourself who took the initiative to get these partnerships?
I guess in the initial stages of these partnerships, quite a few of them have been driven by myself from the more strategic level. But I think in terms of operating these partnerships, if it's only between the CEO and CEO, that partnership isn't going to work. You know, I think you've got to. I think stage one is to make sure that all levels of the organisation are involved in understanding what the partnership is trying to achieve and what their role is in making that successful. And then the hope is that if you can do that, then the next stage, some of your partnerships can start from the ground up. So the fourth example I shared, the Big Church Festival partnership, where we put the tent on at the festival with children's books. That was one that was developed from someone sort of a junior manager within the team. So I was really pleased that hopefully this partnership kind of mentality was starting to get to a place where people within the organisation were feeling that they could bring forward ideas for new partnerships as well.
Yes, I like your questions to check, to check whether things are happening smoothly or is it running well, because there could be some pushback from your team or the teams of the other party. So how to get those relationships moving forward and yeah, getting better. That's that's a challenge. Okay. From Susan Binion, can you explain how economy of scale works with printing? Do you get that if you are printing different titles at the same time?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Susan's coming from a publisher's perspective or an author's perspective. From the publisher perspective, what we try and do is we look at the beginning of the year. We try and work out how many books we're going to print in that year, how many what different formats we're going to print, and we try and sort of package them up into really big packages so that instead of coming to a printer saying, here's one book, can you give us a price for it? We can go to the printer and say, here are 50 books that we're going to print this year, or here are 200 books that we're going to print this year. And hopefully there's then an incentive for the printer to give you a better cost. Obviously, if you're an author, you're a bit more limited in terms of how you can do that. But if, for example, you can try and manage your quantities so that you do your reprints at the same time, then again, you can do something similar. Maybe you can bring 3 of your books to a printer at the same time instead of 1 book at the same time. So it's basically about sort of how can you make yourself more appealing for the printer to work with, i.e. by giving them a bigger bit of pie. And therefore they'll be able to give you a bigger cost. I think that a lower cost. I think that's the fundamental principle.
Thank you for that, Sam. Bob Clark, initially, Sam, did your SPCK trustees think of your partnerships as diluting your publishing focus, or did they appreciate the need for market diversification?
I think all our partnerships have been very much in the publishing space. I don't think, for example, you'd see SPCK trying to launch a TV channel or set up a church network. I think in the Catholic Church, they have this term sort of an apostolate, and there isn't quite an equivalent of that in the Protestant Church. But I think we see ourselves as having a special role within publishing. So I think our trustees were much more likely to approve partnerships that sort of strengthen us within that publishing space where we think we have particular abilities and a particular role. But within that publishing space, what we've definitely been trying to do is achieve diversification. We were traditionally very reliant on that Anglican market, which had the rather scary looking demographic. And with IVP and with Lion Hudson on board, we now find ourselves in the much stronger in the evangelical market and in the international market and in the children's market. So it's kind of been we haven't been diluting our focus as a publisher, but at the same time, yes, we have been deliberately diversifying. And I think I think our trustees very much saw the logic of both of those parts of that move.
Sam, you mentioned some of the partnerships did not go well. You don't need to name names, but could you share some lessons learned from those failed partnerships?
Yeah, I think one good example. We worked on a very innovative customized book project with in fact, I showed it to Litworld. I replaced it in this presentation with something more up to date. But we went through 2 different partners on that project, and in the end, we ended up doing it in house. Oh. And with the first partner, we spent about a year working on it with them, and in the end, we looked at each other and we just said, "Okay, I think we've got slightly different visions for this. Let's go our own ways." And so that was a good friendly conversation. And the second partner, they then got merged into a different organization, and so it was no longer something they were so interested. So again, they were happy to sort of release us and do their own thing. So it was an example of partnerships that ultimately you wouldn't say they were a successful partnership because they didn't result in the product coming to market, and we had to do it ourselves. But at the same time, I learned things from working with both those organizations, and I think we were able to sort of release those partnerships in ways that we could continue to do things together in the future because we'd ended those partnerships well rather than badly.
Yes, so you're still friends with them.
Exactly, and we're still doing different things with both of those organizations.
Okay, excellent. Okay, we have some more time, a few more minutes for some more questions. If you have anything you'd like to ask, Sam. Okay, have we covered the comments we received from our participants when they registered? Stephanie and Jenny. Yeah, thank you.
There's a question that I think we've missed further up from Stephanie. What role does trust and integrity play in forming partnerships?
Okay.
Also, the relative size of the organization. Might a smaller publisher worry about their authors or designers being coaxed away by larger ones?
Yeah.
So I think if you don't trust each other, you can't have a partnership. I think you can have as many contracts as you want, but I don't see why you'd want to enter a partnership if you didn't trust the other person who is involved. In terms of the relative sizes of organizations, there's obviously a risk of partnerships becoming one-sided, where there's one big organization and one small organization. And I guess that comes down to, is that win-win-win mentality there, or is the big organization ultimately playing tug of war and trying to take advantage of its scale against the smaller organization? Then she says, might a smaller publisher worry about their authors or designers being coaxed away by larger ones? We're kind of, at SPCK, we sort of look at this, particularly in terms of our staff, we're quite happy when our staff are, at least if they've given us a few years, we're reasonably happy if our staff are coaxed. We recently had one of our team recruited to a big job at Doyle & Kindersley. And we tend to be fairly happy to release staff well into bigger roles. We think it's important for them to be Christians within big secular publishers. And I don't particularly resent having my staff poached by big publishers. It's a bit of a risk that we take. I'd much rather it happens after 5 years, as it did with, in fact, 8 years it was with this lady, rather than after 18 months. But I think it's something that to some extent we have to sort of take the bigger picture and accept that we can't necessarily hold on to people. Earlier in my career, I sort of got out of the Christian space back into secular publishing, and I think there can be good reasons for people to want to move to bigger publishers at particular points in their career. So I think we need to I think we need to train people in our organizations in the hope that they'll value what we've done for them, and maybe they'll come back to us in 10 years' time when they've picked up some big skills from the or some big contacts from the corporate world. And again, in terms of authors, I guess that is a bit more of a worry to us. But I think hopefully that grid that I shared of the benefits of being small versus the benefits of being big. I think actually being small, I think we have quite strong pitch, and you'll notice I see SPCK in the small category here. I think we have quite strong pitches that we can make to authors around the fact that they'll actually get some attention from us that they might not get from a big corporate publisher. We can share our values with them in a way that a big publisher might not share those values. So I think there's real opportunities to pitch the amount of focus and the amount of personal care that you'll get from a smaller organization.
Thank you. Yes, several people are thanking us for this presentation. Jeff Crosby, thanks to you, Sam, and to MAI for this webinar. John Campbell, can you tell us a bit more about the Big Church Read?
Yeah, the best thing for you to do, Joan, is probably to have a look at the website. If you type in Big Church Read, I'm very confident it will come up it should come up on Google, even if you're in South Africa or wherever. I don't think there's anything else called that. But it's pretty simple. There's one organization behind it, but they got buy-in from a lot of different publishers who we were sort of all willing to put in the same amount to support it, in the hope that it would become a success. And basically they choose a book roughly every month that is the Big Church Read, and they go to the effort of creating the material around it and reaching out to the churches so that hopefully lots of churches can read this book together. Try together. If we want to increase the size of the pie, getting the church to read is probably the single piece of lowest hanging fruit that we could try and achieve.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your appreciation of this webinar. Yeah, John Nakati, Kim Makara, Bob Clark, Stephanie, Joanne Teshafun, Daka, thank you so much for being here. Sam, could you please, can we hear some parting words from you, words of encouragement for publishers and writers?
Yes, I just think there's so many talented people out there, both authors, publishers, organizations. I think the more outward looking we can be as publishers, the better those opportunities will be for us to grow the size of the pie. But I think the good thing is I just see so much of this happening. Particularly, you see it so viscerally, sort of in your face at events like Lit World and things that MAI put on. But I know that it also happens behind the scenes. You see all these meetings at Frankfurt and those kind of places. I think we are pretty good at this. I just encourage us to be to keep on being deliberate and keep on being focused in terms of partnerships, and keep on being willing to take a risk on a partnership and be generous in a partnership.
Thank you so much. All right, so we are at the end of our webinar here, and we just would like to appreciate Sam for helping us, for teaching us, for encouraging us today. And thank you everyone for coming and for joining us in this webinar. We trust that this has been helpful. As an appeal from MAI, if this webinar has been helpful to you and our other webinars in the past, may you consider giving to support MAI so more people can benefit from this free training around the world. So we invite you to visit our website. There is a donate page there, www.maiglobal.org. So we will see you again next month for our webinar. We'll send out announcements. But in the meantime, we just want to thank you for joining us today. And thank you again, Sam, for leading us. God bless you all, and goodbye for now.